For this month's Tailoring of the Month, we're going to cover creating screen space on handheld forms. Now, this is one of the most common questions that I get from partners and customers alike, whether the end user is using a tailored application or one of our handheld applications that comes out of the box. We often get these questions because customers typically want to see more information. So sometimes they'll add some UDFs to the screen, or maybe they want to pull some more descriptions for, the warehouse employee to have some more visual cues for what items they're picking, things like that. But it's easy for these screens to get very crowded very quickly because we're working with the limited space of the device that the user is using, whether that's a handheld scanner with a screen or a tablet, what have you. We're encumbered in certain situations by the space on those screens. So today we're going to cover how to free up some more space, cause different fields to appear or go away at different times, some things like that. And we'll talk about all the ins and outs of that. And this is typically a pretty easy thing to accomplish in Form Studio. A lot of people just don't realize how to do it because unless you're very comfortable with the Form Studio product, some of these things are a little bit more off the beaten path and you don't think of them right away when it comes to freeing up some screen space. So we're going to go ahead and get into that. So first, I'm going to go to Form Studio here. I actually already have it open, but just remember Form Studio FS is all of our handheld applications. And now in Form Studio, for today's situation, I'm just going to find a more crowded application that we offer out of the box, and we'll work on that a little bit. So if I go into Agility Essentials FS, our goods receipt PO displays a lot of information. So you can see here, goes a little bit longer than the whole screen. It has 6 buttons instead of, the most common 2 or 3 buttons that we typically see. This has a full 6. So this is going to be probably our most crowded screen out of the box. Now, typically, the out of the box products don't have as many issues with screen space until you start tailoring them and adding some fields, but this is a good place to start. So remember, anytime you're making changes to this stuff, you need to make a copy in your own project so it doesn't get overridden by a WiSys update. So I'm going to go to Open Project here, and I'm just going to dive into my Tailoring of the Month project. And inside of Tailoring of the Month, then I'm going to go ahead and make a copy and just go find that standard goods receipt PO here. All right, so I just want the standard one right here. Hit OK, and we'll just call this clean goods receipt PO. And again, some of the things that we're doing today, I'm going to show you how to do it, but there aren't major enhancements to make this form, and you'll see early on why that is, even though it looks crowded initially. Some of these tricks that I'm going to show you for how to free up space on the screen are already being employed in this form, and a lot of our out-of-the-box forms do that, right? Because we know the tool set really well, so we try and make these as clean as possible initially. So there's really 2 areas to focus on here when we're talking about cleaning up the screen and trying to just make it a little bit less crowded. We have our main body here, which is all of our text fields and lookup fields, all this data is displayed here. Then we also have our buttons. And we can employ these tactics in both situations. The main tactic that I'm going to show you, the first thing, and the one that's already being deployed on this form, that can pertain to both buttons and fields. Then we'll go over another tactic for each on just some ways to clean some things up. So first, I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to drill in to the actions that already exist that accomplish what I'm going to talk about here. So on our item field, if we go into our actions, the first thing, the most common thing and probably the most efficient way to accomplish this is through formulas that hide fields or buttons. So that's the first thing we're going to look at. So here, if we drill into our formula, we'll notice there's a formula here called not batched. And if I edit that, we'll see that if manage batch equals false, so if the item we pick is not batch tracked, item visibility here is checked to hide our manufacturer batch, our batch field, and our batch expiration date. So what that means is when we select an item, If that item is not batch tracked, the system will talk to SAP. It'll say, okay, hey, that item's not batch tracked. And then those fields will actually drop off of the screen, saving 3 lines on the screen there, of course, and getting rid of those fields. Now, that doesn't help you in a situation where the item is batch tracked because those fields will still need processed. But this is an example of saving some screen space. We're going to look at what this looks like. And of course, this can apply then to a bunch of other areas, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's just go ahead and close out of this and let's look at what this actually does. So here you can see, there's a lot of fields on the screen. It's a pretty full screen. Now, if we go ahead and simulate our form, and just grab a random order number here. So the item's not batch tracked, so that field goes away. Now the first thing here you'll notice, mine does not have manufacturer's batch or expiration date initially, right? So we already have 2 fields hidden, and then once I select that item that again is not batch tracked, we see that batch field drop off of the screen. And by those 3 fields dropping off of the screen, we no longer have that scroll bar there. We no longer have limited space on the screen. Now we have a pretty freed up screen. So why do those first 2 fields drop off? That has to do with my settings. So manufacturer's batch and expiration date, you notice those aren't there right away. We actually have a formula on the startup of the form here to check for settings, because you can turn those fields on and off in your agility settings. So here we're checking and we're saying, okay, is this company using manufacturer's batch? If the answer is no, then we hide manufacturer's batch regardless. We don't care if it's batch or not, no matter what, they're not using that. Same thing for expiration date, right? So in this case, because of my settings, whenever it checks my WiSys settings, it'll say no, he does not want to use batch expiration date, so it hides that expiration date field. So that's why the first thing when we simulate this, we see manufacturer's batch and expiration date drop off immediately, and that form already becomes more clear. There's no scroll bar. Everything that's going to be displayed is displayed. But then again, taking it one step further, when we select our non-batch tracked item, that field drops off anyway. So now, in this situation with the out-of-the-box form, there's a very clear use case for why that is, right? We're dropping these fields off because the company doesn't want to use them and they identify that in their settings, or we're dropping them off because the item's not batch tracked. So they're obsolete in those situations. There's no reason for them anyway. But some spots where that can actually come into play and be really helpful, there's a couple of different areas there, right? So number one, when we're talking about fields here up at the top, let's say when we start, we think it's very important to have description in vendor because it helps our receivers to know that they have the right item, right? When they scan the item code, description and vendor populate. So the receiver checks those to say, okay, yep, that's the right description of the item. That's the right vendor. I know the barcode worked correctly. I know I have the right item number in here. I can proceed. So if they use those initially for that, but then when they select a bin to put away to, they don't need those. And let's say, we still had some additional information here like batch, right? If the screen was still very crowded and we decide we don't need those fields, we could put on a formula to hide those, at a certain point in time once we decide they are now obsolete. So if in this case we're saying once bin is selected, the screen's very crowded, they still need to enter in quantity. Let's say all these fields are still available, right? And quantity is down at the bottom, so order would actually drop off your screen whenever you get to quantity. We would move down, we'd see quantity, order would drop off. Let's say we don't want that to happen. So now we know we don't need description and vendor in this case because the user's already confirmed that it's the right description, right vendor. So when we select bin, we want to hide those 2 fields. We can use a formula to accomplish that, right? So I can go on my bin field here, and for my 4th action, I can do a really simple no criteria formula here, where I'm basically going to say, okay, it's always true. I'm going to call this hide item confirmation fields, right? So these are the fields that confirm I have the right item. So I'm going to say no matter what, every time I want vendor and description to disappear after I select the bin, right? And again, in this case, the field gets cleaned up pretty quickly when you select a non-batched item, based off of what we showed. But just imagine the screen is still very full. You still have to use a scroll bar, or some fields, can't be displayed at the same time. So that's when this comes into play, and that's when this is very helpful. So we have that formula set up there. Now, if we go back in and we simulate, now when I select my item, so still we have description and vendor. Again, we're still going to have description and vendor. Bin populated automatically though. So let me take out my receiving bin here actually. So I'm just not going to use a receiving bin in this case. And we're going to put it away immediately ourselves so that we can make this function the way I want it to. So we select that. Now these fields are populated. Now I'm actually selecting a bin. I'm not using my defaulted receiving bin in my WiSys settings. I'm going to select one myself. So now those actions that are on the bin field will take place when I select it. And now you see it hid those additional item related fields, and I have even more real estate on my screen. So again, that specific case comes into play more when we have a customer that maybe they have 2 or 3 UDFs they want to pull the screen, they want to pull some more descriptions. We can have different descriptions displaying at different times and drop things off the screen as needed to free up space as we go, right? So initially you might look at the form, like in this case, and there's all these fields, right? And it looks very crowded. But as you see, as we went through the process, once we selected a bin, we were down to what, four or five fields on the form or something like that, right? The screen gets very clean and much less cluttered very quickly. So that also can apply to buttons, like I mentioned at the beginning. So when we look at our buttons here, we have 6 buttons. Feels a little bit unnecessary. So let's say we only want available to promise and view to be visible whenever we are on the item field. And then again, once we get to that batch field, we just want to hide them every time. So when they first select an item, they could go ahead and look at the ATP, or they could look at the item view and get any additional information they need. But once we select a bin, we've moved past the item stage. Let's go ahead and forget about that stuff, right? We know we're going to move forward here. So if we want to hide those, and let's say we're going to hide post too, so we can get rid of that whole row. So we're going to hide all 3 of these after item selected. We move on to bin, just because I've deemed that I don't care about them. Once I've selected item, I don't want to see those anymore. Those buttons are only relevant to me when I'm on the item stage. So I'm gonna go back to that action I added, and now I can go ahead and go in button visibility. I can turn those 3 fields off at this stage. Again, this is criteria always true. It could also be something like, if the item group is equal to, I have a group called printers. If it's equal to printers, then we hide these buttons. They're not relevant for printers or something like that. We could do it based on criteria as well. But in my opinion, at this stage, I just don't care about them once I've gone off that item field. So I'm making it always true. I'm going to save here, close, save. And again, once I get on that bin field, they will drop off the form. So everything's still here. And now I select bin, I'll lose these 2 fields. I'll also lose all 3 of those buttons. And we'll see a much cleaner looking form, with much less on the screen. So again, that ability to hide things at different stages, that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. You can do that all throughout the form. You can do it with fields and buttons. So think about those roles. Think about when things become obsolete. If there's a button they're clearly not going to press after the first step in the process, hide it. If it's not needed, hide it. Fields that they need early on to check data, but then they don't care about later, go ahead and hide them, right? That type of stuff we can easily hide from the display, free up space that way. Now I want to talk about one more way we can do this in both sections. Of course, there's a lot of things we can do to clean up the screen, but I'm going to talk about one main way for each section as well here before we wrap this up. I don't want the video to go too long. So first with buttons, let's just talk about a nice easy way here. We have the ability to add a combo button. So right now you can see we're totally full on here. So let's just go ahead and say we want to combine ATP and view under one button. And then we're also going to do post and save, or I don't want to make it too complicated. We'll do ATP, view, post, and save all to one button here for right now, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start removing these. Now, if you were doing this yourself, you'd probably want to drill into the actions on those and take a picture and make sure you know exactly what they're doing. So let's say I know exactly what all those are doing. I remove them all. Now I can add a combo button. Move this to the first spot. That's where I want it to be. And this combo button can have multiple buttons inside of one. So now I deleted that additional row of buttons I had there where it was taking up more of the screen because I had a second row of buttons. I got rid of that, freed up more real estate, another whole row of real estate by getting rid of those buttons. And now I just can combine them under one button. So the user will actually click this and then they'll select the function that they want. So this first one, in this case, I could call ATP. All right, then I can add another one, and the next one, oh, need a tab there to get it to take it. All right. Next one, I can go ahead and call view, and that would be my view button that I got rid of. So on and so forth, right? So then I would add another one, and this would be post, and then I would add one more here, and it would be save. And you get the gist. And now all those buttons are under one button. So when I simulate here, again, even without hiding those fields, we can now see that the entire thing is displayed. There's no longer a scroll bar. Even before we do any of the hiding of fields, I saved a whole row of space, which made everything fit on the basic, standard screen here, all by just using that combo button in this case. So if I simulate again, I click my button, okay, there's all the different buttons underneath. And now, I have that clean combo button that saved me some space. So some users don't really like that option. They'd probably rather you save space up here by hiding some fields or doing the next option we're going to show. But in this case, again, it's a nice, easy way to cut down on the buttons, especially if you're at a second row, because a second row of buttons, of course, takes up a lot of screen space and can be a bit distracting to the actual user of the Handheld. So lastly, let's talk about one more option here in the main screen. And it's something that a lot of you have probably thought about when it comes to this. When we talk about displaying information, if you have multiple fields like that description and vendor field that they just populate based on something else, they're displaying information for the user to check to confirm, that they have the right item or the right bin or, so on and so forth. If you have multiple fields like that, sometimes the easiest way to do that and display that information would be using a grid. So a grid, in this case, actually gives us, and my grid is all the way down there, so let's go ahead and delete some fields here so we can free up some space, just so we can see it. So I'm going to get rid of vendor, description, and UOM for my item here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a grid that's going to show those fields. So now those fields are gone, right? And I saved some real estate on the screen. And now I'm going to pull a grid that shows those fields so that I kind of save myself some space there instead of having three fields, going down vertically, taking up 3 rows of space. I can combine those 3 rows into one row. So here I can decide whatever I want that query to display, right? So without worrying about too much about the SQL right now, because I'm not sure, what all fields I'd want to pull, let's just grab item name and item code, just for an example, right? That'd be from OITM, where item code equals our text item. So this is just a real basic SQL query here. I'm just trying not to give myself a headache because I didn't prepare anything before time for a query for this grid specifically. Not sure what all fields you would want displayed, but let's say I hit some fields, freed up some space, and I just want this grid to pull item name for me. And instead of item code, we'll grab something else here. We'll do this. So if I save this here, we'll see our whole table. I can pick a couple extra fields to add, right? So I got item name. Let's add the code for the item group. And then let's just go ahead and add purchase item here to make sure, okay, this is an item that we should be doing GRPO for. So we have all those fields. Can save that. So I'm going to go to my item field and I'm going to trigger the grid to refresh at that point in time. So I'm just going to throw a action here at the bottom called grid refresh. And after I select my item, it'll refresh my grid on the screen to pull that data. And now when I go ahead and simulate here, go to my order, and we do have some missing information. Now I have some things to clean up because I got rid of some fields, right? So remember, there's always a trickle down effect when you edit things. I'm only really concerned about cleaning up the screen space for this video. But remember, okay, I got rid of that text vendor field. It's still in that validation. I need to remove it from that validation because that field is no longer here. Same thing's going to happen this time with the description, but that's fine. And now we see our actual description pulls down here. I could change this a little bit because I know that, purchase item is going to be a real small field. It's always going to be a flag, and item group code is going to be a little smaller. So I can make some adjustments to give most of the screen space there to the item name. But now we have that grid that populated at the bottom. So if we still had multiple fields in here, if we didn't already do so much cleanup, and we needed to, say cut down 3 fields, we could just add a grid here, remove the 3 fields from the main screen, and put those 3 fields onto the grid to display them horizontally instead of vertically in that case. So that's another way to save some real estate there. All 3 of those options, right, I think are very helpful. They all have their different positive and negative aspects to them, but I think the most common, the easiest to do is to hide fields at certain stages when you're using the form. It frees up space rather quickly, but of course, again, you can easily add a grid to display things horizontally instead of taking up several lines vertically, or add a combo button to bring your rows that are allotted to buttons back down to 1 row and try and keep it at 1 row, which is a good rule of thumb. A second row you will see on several of our out-of-the-box forms, but if you can get that down to 1, that definitely will save a lot of screen space quickly too. So I hope you got something out of this session. I hope that was helpful. Use these tips to try and cut down on screen space, especially when you have tailored applications that you're adding, 5, 6, 7 fields for data display and information display. The more you do that, utilize these techniques even more to keep that screen free and clear and easy for the user to, sort through all the information provided. Thanks for watching.